For me, what it was like to live with Tide, it came on really slowly. I think it started when I was about 13, where I realised that if I manipulated my insulin, I could start eating the foods that I was told I wasn't allowed or I was restricted from having as a child. So I guess for me it really didn't start as Tide at all. It was just giving me a bit more freedom with food. Living with type 1 diabetes, I feel incredibly controlled by food anyway. Everything is revolved around food. I can't just eat at spur of the moment, or if I can, I have to think of what that impact has on me in the next few hours. In my healthcare, that was never really explored, what that would be like growing up and how that changed as my relationship with my diabetes changed as I got older.
Disordered eating with my diabetes, the easiest way to sum it up is it's just easier not to eat. When your line is pretty good for the day, you don't want to do anything that's going to cause you to have a spike or a low that you're going to have to correct and then get a spike. When you're struggling to keep up with everyday living tasks, having to test your sugars, calculate your carbs, calculate your insulin dose, put all that effort in, it's just easier not to eat. I didn't recognise my behaviours as an eating disorder. I wouldn't have crossed my mind, because you're told that an eating disorder is related to body image, so you only do it if you're concerned with your image.
I didn't understand for me what was going on. And generally for me it wasn't really related to body image. It was more about the insulin and I guess the food as well. And that actually it was easier just to not carb count and not take any insulin. And then at the point where I felt really super rough, I would take some insulin and hope that it sorted me out before I was really rough.
It was because I put the weight on so quickly after I started like a regular insulin regime. And I think that's when it all kind of clicked, that the less I weigh, the less insulin I have to take. And the less insulin I take, the easier it's going to be for me to lose weight. And then that turned into me not eating and an obsession with like, I need to be thin, I need to be thin, I need to be thin. And then I realised like, this is why people misuse their insulin, because the less you take, the more you lose weight. So it just becomes a cycle of, and that's how you get disordered eating.
I manipulated my insulin to the point that I then wouldn't take it. I stopped taking my long-acting insulin for... I think I became very clever. Maybe not clever is the right word, but I definitely understood how to keep myself out of hospital. So when healthcare professionals are looking at the numbers of people who are living with TIDE, I don't feel they'd ever find the actual number, because I became very good then at keeping myself off data and off records, and if I can do that, then there's other people doing that as well. You know, very close to the edge. So many times I should have been in hospital, but I just wouldn't go, because being in hospital is an unpleasant experience, so you do anything you can to avoid that. Living with type 1 diabetes is an unpleasant experience, and so you try it. Sometimes you do everything to avoid that as well, and TIDE for me was that. I couldn't control managing my diabetes, so I became very good at controlling being uncontrolled. And at the time, that is exactly what I needed to survive, I think. But the repercussions and the long-term complications of that is horrific. I lost my sight in my one eye for 18 months, and the repercussions that had on my life was catastrophic, and very little support for that either.
With eating came so much to think about, and being really self-critical when things didn't go right, or my sugars did go high or low afterwards, even though I'd calculated everything. It just became easier not to eat, so it wasn't like I decided to disengage with eating. It just a slow thing. I'd start eating less and less meals a day, and it just became easier, and my line would be flatter, and I didn't really notice it was a problem until I was going days without eating.
You wake up and the first thing you've got to do is check your blood sugar, because you might want to eat breakfast. And then you look at your blood sugar and you think, oh, I've got a great line. Do I really want to ruin that line for a bowl of Weetabix? Like, is it really worth it? So I just don't eat breakfast, and then I carry on until lunch. And then I might have had like maybe like a little blip, but the line is usually great. So I get to lunch and I think, is it worth ruining that line just to eat some lunch? So I skip lunch. But then by the time I get to dinner, I'm absolutely starving. So I eat as much as I can, I binge eat, and then I overcompensate for my insulin. So, and then I'm so full from the binge eating that I can't eat for the hypo. And that's when I realised that I've got a problem, I'm not coping. So it just got to the point where I was crying every day. Just felt like I couldn't do this anymore. Phoning my team like every day saying I can't do this anymore, I don't want to be diabetic. And that's the thing that I remember saying the most, and I still say to this day, like, I don't want to be diabetic anymore. I don't want to be diabetic. And yeah, that's when I thought I really need help, and I really need to do something about this.
I think there was a bit of me that felt like this was my choice and my problem, and that I should be the person that had to sort it out. And in some ways you are, you know, it is me that has to take the insulin. It's not somebody else that has to do it for me. That I didn't know how anybody else could help. I didn't really know what the problem was. And then things changed a bit, and I still didn't really take insulin, but I also then wasn't eating so much. And there were occasions where I started to claim I'd had lunch when I hadn't, or said I'd stayed at a friend's house for dinner when I hadn't, and I walked all the time, which actually just made things worse because I didn't have enough insulin in my body. So exercising just made everything worse rather than better. Exercise lowers blood glucose levels unless they're already too high and there isn't enough insulin, in which case makes them higher, makes things worse. I had a few short stays in hospital over the years, but it was always a case of admitted. Occasionally it was in time that I didn't have DKA, and other times it wasn't in time for that. But typically it would be a night, maybe 2 nights, and they'd get things back to where they should be. And I'd smile and say, yes, I understand, I know it's important. Of course, obviously. And then I'd go home and everything would be exactly the same.
Living with type 1 for 32 years, I fall through so many gaps, or I never meet criteria. Even at the time when I look back at my eating disorder, my weight would never have been an issue to have got onto an eating disorder criteria. But yeah, we fall through a lot of gaps, and the gaps increase when you move from paediatrics up to adult services.
I was referred to eating disorder services as an outpatient. I'd go every week for about an hour. I think it was over a year. I know the psychologist I was seeing kept prolonging my thing, and you know, when it came to an end, it was because she'd run out of available time she could give me. It wasn't, we think you're okay to leave the service now. But she was the very first person in my healthcare history to bring any side of mental health in with my diabetes care. So she arranged an actual appointment, like a meeting with my diabetes care team to discuss it. And she actually put me in touch with the people that led me to be involved in this programme.
My GP spotted a very tiny opportunity to make me fit the criteria for something. And that support was very helpful. That made a real difference. But when that person left their role to move to somewhere else, that was it. That support was done. And that was years ago now. There's been no further support. I'm not aware of any opportunity for any support.
Like, I knew that I was struggling because I was crying every day, and they must have known I was struggling because I was leaving voicemails crying every day. And it was just got to the point where I was phoning, and I realised there's probably no point in me phoning, because there was nothing they could do. They, you know, my team had said to me, we do not have the right people for you to speak to, you know, to help you specifically with your mental health.
I think if we were to sort of look at how we created services to help with people who are living with TIDE, it's really, really important not to have silos that have an understanding of so many different parts of what that person is going through at the time.
I think that psychological support is the most lacking component of adult services for diabetes, and I think it's the most overlooked and underestimated tool.
Please let me talk to somebody. Let me talk to a psychologist, someone who understands my brain the way that the endocrinologist understands my pancreas.
I think I need somebody who understands TIDE, understands the relationship between diabetes and mental health, and who has the time and the remit to be able to take on patients on an ongoing basis. 6 appointments for 6 weeks won't cut it, because you've got more than 6 hours worth of stuff you need to talk about. And if it's somebody who doesn't understand diabetes and doesn't understand TIDE, then you're going to spend that 6 hours just trying to explain those things to them. You're not going to get the support you need if you're having to say, this is what diabetes is, or this is why I have issues with food. Because actually, what you need to do is you need to be unpicking those issues, not just talking about why they're there in the first place.